Stanley Kubrick. What is there to be said about Stanley Kubrick that hasn't already been said? With a discography of 13 films, he solidified himself as a memorable and distinct voice in cinematic history, creating images throughout his career with whatever he was given that have ingrained themselves in the minds of cinema goers through the ages. See, that's the thing, he's easily the director who makes me think the most, with even my least favourite of his films burning themselves into my mind. His films are always slow burns that are always fun in the moment but only get better upon contemplation. I mean, Jesus, I've rewritten my review for each movie on this list and reordered my ranking over and over and over again, and will continue to do so after this video is released because there's so much to unpack both within the stories of his movies and in how you feel about them over time, all of them aging like fine wine. As a result, I have no problem both objectively and personally marking him as one of, if not the greatest and definitely most unique filmmakers of all time. He's made a lot of good movies, which means no two Kubrick rankings will ever be the same, which I'm saying because I'm looking at my list right now and it literally looks like I've chosen the placements that will piss the most people off as possible. We'll just take this film by film. All I can say is buckle up, please don't hate me, and let's get started. Fear and Desire. The best and really only way to watch Kubrick's first movie is to just see it as a future master experimenting with and learning how filmmaking works. Fear and Desire is unanimously agreed to be his worst film, even by the man himself, and I don't think there's any defending that point. It feels every bit as cheap as it was, with poor acting, disjointed storytelling, no real sense of progression or character, and at times hard to watch editing. While the use of camera work may be impressive at times, just like all of his other films, this film has very little to offer in entertainment value. Spartacus. This is one of those films that just isn't for me, and because of that I'm only going to talk about it briefly. Spartacus isn't a poorly made, poorly written or poorly acted movie, but it is a film I'm inherently disinterested in, and the fact that Kubrick had very little creative control in making this film his own doesn't help either. Objectively, yeah, Spartacus should be higher, because if this kind of film sounds good to you, then I think you'll absolutely love it. It has a lot to offer to fans of this genre, but there wasn't anything I personally got out of it, and I can't see myself ever revisiting it. Killer's Kiss. There's something really charming about watching Killer's Kiss in the context of Kubrick's career. Watching Kubrick take over so many responsibilities on such a low budget and still coming out with some memorable visuals and honestly pretty exciting fight scenes, much of which takes place in long takes, is kinda cute, what else can I say? As for enjoyment though, that's kind of where it ends for this film. For such a short movie, a lot of this feels like padding, wasting time that really needed to have been spent developing these characters and the central romance. The plot is paper thin in every aspect, leaving a very small impact on the viewer. As I said, it's fun to watch this if you're doing a Kubrick marathon, but other than that, I really don't see much reason to check this out. Barry Lyndon. Okay, look, I know I'm an awful person. I, like many others, was intimidated by the setting and length of Barry Lyndon, but unlike a lot of other people, while there are things in it that I really love, I didn't feel that won over by it. With a lot of Kubrick's, in my opinion, better work, he always seems to be attempting something more cerebral than the typical filmmaker, whether that be in the structure of the film or what he explores within the themes, plot or characters themselves. But in Barry Lyndon, I don't feel any of that. I'd like to say that I didn't feel that runtime, but in all honesty, I did. It's like Kubrick told everyone on set, from the actors to the cameramen, to work in slow motion. Every scene is just characters talking in the same slow, dull tone, with some pretty orchestral music slapped on top. After watching it, I tried to seek out why so many others love this movie, and while I'm not trying to undersell the film to feed my narrative, a lot of the praise comes mostly towards the visuals and the art design, which, yes, is beautiful and convincing, in fact one of the most beautiful I've ever seen, go figure it's a Kubrick movie, but in this case I just didn't get much more out of it than that. The first half hour and elements of the third act have some decent or even great memorable moments and can make use of some effective music choices, but a majority of this 3-hour film feels meandering, fueled by a character who has the same dull look on his face like he's about to cry the entire movie, and no redeeming attributes that would make me want to follow him for 3 hours. Lolita. 9 movies down and we're already getting into films that are pretty good. Lolita was another one I wasn't particularly looking forward to because of the subject matter and runtime, but while it does run a bit long, I did find myself pretty entertained throughout. I probably laughed at this film more than any other Kubrick movie, and I think Peter Sellers is great. The fact that this is written and directed in a way that's not only respectful but pretty easy to sit through without feeling too uncomfortable definitely works to its credit. It is pretty obvious how censored the movie was, even if it is kind of understandable. The way it wraps up is pretty abrupt and leaves a lot of the plot feeling a little inconsequential, but there's definitely worse ways to kill 2.5 hours. Dr. Strangelove. Now, anything from this point out I do love, so while 8th may sound low, I assure you, being the 8th best Kubrick movie is nothing to be ashamed of in my book. What more is there to say about Dr. Strangelove other than the fact that it's one of the most clever comedies of all time, held up by the charismatic performances of Peter Sellers, George C. Scott and Sterling Hayden. Its subtleties and observations are effective in showing the ridiculousness of war with a moral that feels just as true today as it did more than 50 years ago. And if you read up on the use of sexual imagery and metaphor Kubrick used to convey some of this satire, your mind will be blown by its genius. So why isn't it higher? Well, in all honesty, out of all the films above this, I felt Dr. Strangelove provided the least on a second watch. It's fun, intense and clever in the moment, but I'll be putting on any of these for a rewatch before this one, starting with The Killing. The Killing is Kubrick's third film, and I think the first sign that he had more to offer and ideas beyond a lot of the filmmakers around him. It also happens to be his most underrated film if you ask me, and easily his sharpest. Now, this film came out nearly half a century before I was born, so forgive me if my facts are a little wrong here, but the non-chronological intertwined storytelling was completely ahead of its time, and even today, still provides for a nerve-wracking and tense experience. And don't forget to add to that some fun dialogue, beautiful visual symbolism, and rich characters. Seriously, the cast are really fun. I mean, this guy, he's in like 2 scenes and a fight scene, and he's one of the highlights of the film for me. Can someone explain why I'm so in love with this guy? The Killing is slick and tightly told from beginning to end, with a constant rising of stakes and anticipation, and I'd give it a solid recommendation. The Shining. Okay, here we go. The Shining is beautiful. Its use of cinematography and imagery is unmatched in the grand scope of the horror genre, and the performances are extremely memorable. There's a lot to unpack under the surface of this film, and it's detailed yet vague enough that you can come to it with nearly any theory and it will give you back whatever you bring to it. But I'll come clean and say now that my first watch left me kind of disappointed based on the critical acclaim this film has garnered. I won't go too in depth today, but put it simply, I felt Jack's descent into madness didn't feel as tense as it could be, I felt we needed more time to be warmed to Danny and Wendy before the creepy stuff began, and I felt the final confrontation paled in comparison to the scariness of what had come before. However, the reason it's ranked this high is because I think The Shining is a film that's built to be rewatched, because my second viewing was a much better experience. Once you know everything that happens at the end and with the characters, the sense of dread is only more potent. It's all just way more effective, and that feeling of being there before and knowing what will inevitably happen is ripped right out of the theme of the film. But whether or not I can fully shake off how that initial watch left me feeling, only time will tell. Eyes Wide Shut. The best thing about Eyes Wide Shut and a lot of Kubrick's work is the way it so perfectly captures extremely difficult to capture feelings. Watching Eyes Wide Shut is like experiencing a nightmare, with a story that despite being pretty thin is tense, unpredictable, and at times horrifying. Thinking about this movie after seeing it for the first time is like looking back on a dream that made you feel uncomfortable, and honestly, what can I do but take my hat off to Kubrick for that? As always, there's so much to unpack underneath the surface of the film, both in the filmmaking itself and what it has to say about the use of power in society, using sex as its main tool for that, and unpacking all of its subliminal messagings and subtleties only proves that this is a film crafted by a seasoned director. The film does go on for a bit too long though, with what seems like would be a perfect climax taking place an hour before the movie ends, leaving the rest of the plot feeling pretty unmotivated and kind of underwhelming in the moment, which I'm aware some people are debating could have something to do with Kubrick's death in the same year of its release. Still though, there's a lot to walk away with in Eyes Wide Shut, and I'd heavily recommend it. But is it Kubrick's best contribution to cinema like he said? Paths of Glory. This is easily Kubrick's most human film. If we're speaking in superlative terms, Paths of Glory is easily his most emotional, and something that I think a majority of people can connect and sympathise with. The first 2 acts bring a lot of greatness with Kirk Douglas's likeable character and performance, not to forget that beautiful war scene and plenty of Kubrick's iconic tracking shots. But then that ending came and made me want to cry and cheer at the same time. The last 20 to 30 minutes of the film is a rollercoaster and has some of the most tender, real scenes I've ever experienced. It goes from tear-jerking to anxiety-inducing to triumphant and hopeful. Trying to put into words what these final moments have to say about the corruption of war and the importance of unity and sticking to what you believe in during the absence of hope wouldn't do it justice. So if I'm going to say anything here, I'm going to say go watch it for yourself. 2001: A Space Odyssey. While it's third on my list, I think it's pretty hard to deny that, objectively speaking, 2001 is Kubrick's greatest film. If not, then it's easily his most patient, using visuals over dialogue wherever he can, making for one of the most hypnotising experiences you will ever have watching a film. What's so amazing about this, amongst many other things, is how incredible 2001 looks to this day, despite being released all the way back in 1968. The effects, the cinematography, the set design, the unique use of light. Kubrick knocked it out of the park with this one, and believe me, being the best looking Kubrick movie is no achievement to sneer at. While it's clear the movie wants to discuss humanity across the ages, Kubrick's main intention with this one was to create an emotional and internal experience, and I think he definitely succeeded in that. The ape sequence is... the ape sequence in 2001. The second act is tense and terrifying, creating such an intimidating antagonist with probably the most simplistic of images, and the ending is confusing yet captivating, somehow feeling so triumphant despite being so vague, and no matter who you are, I have no doubt you'll leave this thinking about it for days. But what's holding it back from that number one spot for me? Well, the extended space sequences are all whimsical, beautiful and quirky on their own, but once you compile 4 or 5 of them one after the other in a film that's 2.5 hours long, it does bog down the experience knowing that a good percentage of this thing consists of just one thing in space getting slightly closer to another thing in space. And because of that, and that alone, number 1 and 2 just sneak in there to take my prize for my favourite Kubrick films, and are films I will happily watch anytime, anywhere. Full Metal Jacket. It feels like it's illegal to talk about this film without mentioning how much better the first half is than the second. The first 45 minutes of Full Metal Jacket is pretty fucking perfect, to put it simply. The tight direction, editing and storytelling is hypnotising, and with Kubrick's amazing blend of comedy with horrific moments and using repetition and visual symbolism to show the downfall of its main character, this thing is as satisfying a rollercoaster as movies get, and yet it's so subtle. Not only are the performances amazing at conveying whatever Kubrick wants to say, not only is it so completely iconic, but it all builds amazingly to this disturbing yet powerful ending. Saying that though, I don't want to completely undersell the second half. Joker and Animal Mother in particular are both fun and relatable characters to watch in their own right, but the whole cast is human and memorable. Then there's the final scene, which is haunting and powerful, plus basically any scene with music is instantly iconic. I'm surprised Kubrick didn't incorporate songs into his films more often. As much as Full Metal Jacket may at times feel a little disjointed and more of a collection of moments on a first watch, upon second viewing and further contemplation, it just feels like Kubrick tapped into a different part of my brain with this one, haunting me as I contemplate the film's themes of the duality of man and leaving me with a smile on my face right from the haircut montage up until the final shot. A Clockwork Orange. If there's one thing Kubrick always does well, it's drawing you into the world of the film you're watching, and A Clockwork Orange is an amazing example of that. Kubrick almost effortlessly brings you into this nightmarish, dystopian environment using iconic set design, dark humour, striking imagery, and great musical choices, which can all be seen in the first shot, which is probably my favourite opening shot of all time. It's equally as quirky as it is uncomfortable to sit through, yet Kubrick seems so indifferent on the subject. He doesn't try and cram anything down the audience's throat, the film just goes on, exposing us to its cringe-inducing narrative and letting us making up our own minds about how to feel about the whole thing, resulting in a narrative that's still being debated to this day. Its talking points about the importance of free will are thought-provoking, and Malcolm McDowell gives one of the all-time greatest performances. What isn't there to love about this film? Apart from this guy's a terrible actor. So there you go. This was easily my hardest ranking yet because there's so much to love about this guy's discography. The top 8 for me were extremely difficult to pick between, and I'll probably upload this and change my mind tomorrow, but let me know what you guys think and please be kind to me. Also remember to hit that like button and subscribe, and I'll see you soon.